What's up, Battletech fans? Welcome back to the pit, and we're finally gonna tackle some Cappies this time. Morgan Hasek-Davian, eat your heart out. I'm taking it back to the old school with this one, since my last couple painting videos have been speed painting methods, but don't worry, the next one will be back on easy mode, and we'll tackle this exact same scheme but with contrast paints instead. I wanted to do one for the intermediate painters this time, and the Wraith is one of those machines that's near and dear to my heart. We go back like 4 flats on a Cadillac, so let's start at the beginning. As usual, all materials needed will be in the video description, so feel free to grab your brushes and follow along. I'm gonna base this one with a gray primer this time, because I want to tone the red and green top coats down slightly, but not too much. So I chose gray Seer for this, but if you have another similar light gray primer, feel free to substitute. Remember, the darker the primer, the darker the paint on top is going to look. This is because the color underneath either mutes or accentuates the color on top, based on the darkness. Use short, even bursts about 6 to 8 inches away from the model, not a continuous spray. Give it about an hour or so to dry when you're satisfied. For this, I'll grab my trusty wet palette and start by thinning down some Evil Sunz Scarlet. This is one of my favorite go-to candy apple red type colors where a basic red is called for, and if you aren't sure how to thin your paints, I've got a video tutorial on that for you to check out after this. I'll put it up on the screen now. Once you've gotten your paint thin to your liking, apply 2 thin coats of this color to the torso only. But don't worry too hard if a little red gets in spots that you're gonna paint green later. That's one thing I really love about the classic old school method, the amount of control I have. I can go slower and take my time so I avoid getting too much paint in the areas I don't want it, unlike contrast paint that forces me to work a whole lot faster. That just means a large amount of fixing in the long run. Having to do less of that is always preferable, so I recommend giving the old ways a go if you're thinking about taking a chance at it. If the paint goes on streaky at first, try not to panic. That's normal. Just test it a bit on the hex base first to make sure it's going on smoothly before you take the brush to the mini. Now let's give this a go with some Carroburg Crimson at full strength. As usual, we're looking for nice, even coverage here. Nothing too heavy. Try to be aware of any excess wash pooling up in the places you don't want, i.e. the flat surfaces. You're really looking to just darken the flat areas a little while letting the wash do its thing in between the panel lines and the crevasses. Give this about an hour or so to dry, because we're going to be moving on to some dry brushing next, and you don't want to be running your brush through a pool of wash you didn't know was still wet. It ruins your entire miniature. Ask me how I know. So give it some time and come back to it after a bit. You're going to use the same Evil Sunz Scarlet to dry brush this because we're going to come back with a lighter highlight color later, and you want that to stand out. So wipe off most of the paint onto a napkin or paper towel and give it a test on your fingernail or thumb before starting in on the process. It's okay if you get some outside of the area you're working on. Whatever you get on those areas that you're going to paint over later won't really be enough to affect the color going over top of them one way or another, so don't worry about it. Quick passes with the brush are all that's necessary here. You're just looking to cover the sharp edges and high spots to create the illusion of depth and shadow. Don't go too far, because remember, less is more. Give it a few passes and inspect it. Once you're happy, move on. Now let's thin down a little bit of Warpstone Glow. This is another one of my favorite middle-of-the-road colors, where it's not too dark, not too light. Just the right amount of emerald green for my taste in this instance. Now is when you'll have to take a bit more care during the application process. Just remember, you don't want to get any green over the red you've already laid down, so where these limbs connect with the torso, go slow. Trust me, you don't want to spend 30 minutes fixing it and sweating on the outcome. 2 thin coats is good, but my paint was a bit on the thinner side this go-round, so I gave it 3 to get the level of color I wanted, and that worked out for me. Your mileage may vary, just test the paint before you apply it. Give each coat about 40 minutes in between to dry, because being thinned with water makes the drying process go a little faster. Just check and make sure you don't see any areas still waiting to dry before you move on. On the second, or third, coat, you want to make sure you can't see any of the gray primer peeking out underneath, and you're looking for a rich, full green that should remind you of a Bob Ross forest. Think of the arms and legs as happy little trees and you can't go wrong. I kept the hip connectors green instead of deciding to go metallic later, but you can do metal there if you like. There really aren't a lot of hard-line rules here. Once your last coat of green is dry, apply Biel-Tan Green shade at full strength. Again, be careful, as getting into some of the more enclosed spaces where limbs connect can be tricky if you go too fast. Green can stain a red area real quick, and that's a lot harder to fix in post, trust me. So do like we say here on the show and fix it in pre. In other words, take your time and try to get it right on the first go. Again, even full coverage is what you're going for here, so make sure you don't miss anything before you move on. Give the wash about an hour or so to dry. It's second verse, same as the first on this go-round. We're dry brushing the green areas with the same base color again, just to bring the most out of that color before we start highlights later. Just be careful to go slow and avoid brushing green onto the red areas from earlier. So we're going to do a little triple threat action here and start with some Wild Rider Red. I'm using a small angular brush for this application, and I'm only dry brushing the sharp edges, with special attention to the front area. There's a lot of ridges there that I want to highlight, and a little bit of the chest as well. This is a very tightly controlled dry brushing, so make each move purposeful and make them count. Once you're satisfied, move on to Moot Green for the legs. A very light application is all that's needed here, so don't go too hard in the paint. See what I did there? I used mostly vertical movements on the sides of the legs, with the occasional right to left motion on the front. Again, like the Wild Rider, don't go too far with this. Keep it light and move on. Just enough to highlight a little of the edges and panel lines. Once those are complete, I'm going to pick out a few spots for the gold flecks this unit uses as flash. With some Rhulic Gold from Privateer Press, I went with the shoulders, the hips, and the feet. That felt sufficient for me. You do you, but as I've said, I tend to fall on the less is more side of the fence, and at the end of the day, it's really all about being happy with the Mini, so do what makes you happy. My choice as of late for washing gold accents is Seraphim Sepia, but I've also used Agrax Earthshade to good effect in the past, so feel free to try whichever one you happen to have on hand if you don't have both. You won't need a lot on these areas, so be careful to avoid over-application. Now we're in the home stretch, the metal. Everyone knows I like to say pick your spots and get to work, so that's what I did. Leadbelcher is the name of the game for me, and I embellished a bit here with some of the grates on the torso and an area on the chest aside from the usual hands, gun barrel, etc. I did the jump jets and the antennae, but I skipped the arm joints, save for the rear bits on the elbow that looked like a gear wheel. 2 thin coats is all I needed here, and I'd recommend going slow for even coverage. Nuln Oil follows after giving the Leadbelcher the appropriate dry time. This is my favorite 1-2 punch for metallics, but if you happen to have dark tone from the army painter on hand, this will work just as well. I usually give the Leadbelcher about 30 minutes to dry before the application, because otherwise the Nuln Oil will reactivate that paint and the two mix. It's just sparkly black water at that point, and you don't want that. Neither do I. And we're done. I did a lot of ancillary work on this that you don't have to, including dry brushing a lot of the metallics with Runefang steel and highlighting the gold panels with Auric Armor Gold. The cockpit is Uriel yellow with Eandon yellow contrast paint and Ardcoat for shine. Barrel effect is Mago's purple contrast paint with Talisar blue contrast over top. Other basing effects by Army Painter. If you like what you've seen on the channel, do me a big favor and subscribe. Turn on all notifications so you can find out exactly where Battlebound is going to turn up next. Don't forget, folks, Battlebound has a Patreon now at patreon.com/battlebound. Sign up today to enjoy those benefits tomorrow. Keep an eye out for Bottle Caps Part 2 out soon. What paint scheme would you like to see on the channel next? Tell me in the comments below, and don't forget to share this video with your fellow mecha nerds. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Tuckdavian, and I'm sure looking forward to seeing you next time right here out on the Space Lanes.
That's on fact. I was sign stamp delivered. Queen Rat fucking entertainment out of this bitch. Like.